Hi, I'm Mike from 1A Auto. We've been selling auto parts for over 30 years.
What's up guys, I'm Andy from 1A Auto. Today I'm going to show you how to install this hub on this 2011 Ford Explorer. If you need these parts or other parts for your vehicle, click the link in the description and head over to 1aauto.com. We're going to loosen the lug nuts up. I'm just going to use a 19mm socket and a breaker bar. I'm just going to crack them free. Now we're going to raise and support the vehicle. We're using a 2-post lift. If you're doing this at your house, you can use a jack and jack stands. All right, we're going to remove the lug nuts. Once those lug nuts are off, take the tire off. Okay, next we're going to take these 2 bolts out. We're going to use a 17mm wrench, loosen these bolts up. They're on there a little bit tight. You could use a socket and a ratchet. Next I'm going to take a straight blade screwdriver. Just going to pry this out a little bit. Compress the caliper just a little bit. And then pull the caliper out. And then we're going to use a bungee cord. And tie it up top. Wrap it around the spring. Do this so that we don't just let the caliper hang and that could damage the hose. And at this point we can take these brake pads out. There is these little springs. Oops. These springs will come out with the brake pads. It's a good idea to change these, but if they're in good shape you can reuse them. Take the inside brake pad out. Just use a screwdriver to help guide it out. I'm going to take an 18mm socket and a breaker bar, and I'm going to take these 2 bolts out that hold the caliper bracket on. These are on there pretty tight. Once I break those free, then I can use an 18mm socket and a ratchet and loosen these up all the way. All right, take these bolts out. There is some thread locker on these bolts. You can either add some thread locker or get some new bolts. Take this bracket out. Now we can remove the rotor. Just pull it straight out. If it was stuck on there, you can take a hammer and just hammer on the rotor to get it off if it's rusted on there. All right, we're gonna have to loosen up this axle nut. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take a pry bar, I'm gonna stick it right here. I'm gonna take a 1 1/4 socket and a breaker bar. Now be careful when you're doing this. We had to lower this down to the ground. And we're gonna loosen up on this. Once it's broken free, you're good to go. We can raise the vehicle up again. So we're gonna take the socket and I'll just take this nut off by hand. Use my ratchet, take it off the rest of the way. Pull this axle nut off. All right, just to be careful so I don't break the ABS sensor, I am going to take it out. I'm going to use an 8mm socket, an extension, and a ratchet. Take this bolt out here. Take that 8mm bolt out. Then I can take and wiggle the sensor back and forth, try to get it out. I'm going to use some needle nose pliers to help take the sensor out. Here we go. Just pull that out of the way. That's just so it doesn't crack when I'm pulling the hub out. I'm going to use a 18mm socket and a extension. This is actually a wobble extension that kind of helps out a little bit. And I'm going to take these bolts out on the back side. They're in there pretty tight. Take this bolt out, and then we have 3 more bolts. There's a bolt here, a bolt there, and a bolt there. So we're going to take all those bolts out. With the bolt loosened, I can't pull it out completely, but it's okay that I'm not taking it out. I'm just going to loosen them up to this point, and then I'll be able to pull the hub off and put the new hub on, and these bolts will just screw into the new hub. All right, so I got all 4 of these bolts loose on the back, holding the hub on. So next, I just put the nut back on the axle, and then I can use a hammer, just tap on the axle just to loosen that. And I'll take the nut off. The only reason I put the nut on was to protect the threads. I didn't want to mar them up from using the hammer. Then with all this loose, I'll take my sledgehammer and just hit it from the back side, pushing it outwards. This is frozen on there pretty good, but I did break it free a little bit. There is a little bit of an air gap between the hub and the knuckle, but I'm going to take some rust penetrant and just fill it up and let it soak for a little while, because there's a lot of corrosion between the aluminum and the steel of the hub. So we'll do that, let it sit for a little bit. It's coming apart a little bit. It's going to take a lot of effort to get this off. There's many methods to try to get this off. You could try a slide hammer, but the slide hammer is probably going to separate it. So I'm just going to get a bigger hammer. I'm going to hit it from this side a little bit. There's a little bit of a gap over here. I'm just going to take a pry bar, just tap it in behind here, and tap it over here. Tap the axle back in, and there it is. Took a little bit of effort, but we got it out. This is our old hub and bearing. This is our new hub and bearing from 1aauto.com. It's made by TRQ. As you can see, the studs are the same. The machine surfaces are the same. The mounting bolt holes are in the same position. It's got the ABS reluctor wheel is the same. Get yours at 1aauto.com and you'll be ready to rock and roll. So this is the area that the hub was sticking in, right in the hole here. So I'm going to take a wire brush to try to clean up some of this corrosion. Just going to use a little bit of brake parts cleaner, clean this off. Just use a rag, wipe it down. Just going to take a little bit of copper anti-seize, just go all around the knuckle. A little bit, light coating. This way it doesn't seize in there again, in case we ever have to take it out again. Now we'll take the hub, and now the smaller bolt holes go on the top, and the wider ones go on the bottom. So make sure you slide it in the right way. Just slide it over the CV axle. Rock it in. Okay, and it's going in there good. A lot easier than how it came out. Now line the bolts up with the holes. Might have to twist it a little bit. Get those all started. Now I'll take our 18mm socket, extensions, and a ratchet, and We'll just snug these up, all 4 of them. Next, we're going to torque these with a torque wrench to 122 foot-pounds. We're going to start with this one right here in the upper left corner. And then after that, you're going to do this in a sequence. We'll go from there, we're going to cross over to this bottom one, and then the next top one, and then last, this bottom one. Next, we can install this wheel speed sensor. Just slide that down there into position. Install our 8mm bolt. We're going to tighten this down with our 8mm socket and our extension and a ratchet. Just snug. Next, we're going to install the nut. It's recommended that you replace this nut when you're doing this job. I'm going to put my pry bar right there. Just use my socket, 1 1/4 socket and a ratchet. Tighten the nut down. We're going to tighten this nut down. We're going to use a 1 1/4 socket and a torque wrench. We're going to torque this down to 258 foot-pounds. It's a lot of torque, so be careful. Make sure the pry bar is in there good. There we go. We're going to install this brake rotor backwards first. We're going to spray this down with brake parts cleaner, and we'll wipe it down with a rag. There is a protective coating on these rotors so that they don't rust. We'll flip it back over. You're going to want to line up this hole with that screw hole there. Our vehicle didn't have a screw in there, but yours may. We'll spray this down with brake parts cleaner and wipe it down with a rag. Next, we're going to take a lug nut. Because I don't have that screw there, I'm just going to screw this lug nut down so that'll hold my rotor on there better. Now install this brake caliper bracket. These bolts, it's recommended that you replace these bolts. We're going to reuse ours. Now with those 2 bolts tightened up, we're going to torque these to 111 foot-pounds. Use my 18mm socket and a torque wrench. Those are good and tight. Next, we'll install the brake pads. We're just going to take a little bit of caliper grease, put it on where the pads will sit in the bracket. And carefully, you don't want to get any grease on the pad material itself. Slide it into the bracket. We'll do the same with the inside one. Now we're going to take the brake caliper off the bungee, or the bungee off the brake caliper. Flip it over. We're going to take one of the old brake pads, slide it in here. And I'm going to use this brake caliper compressing tool. It's made for 1 piston caliper. This is obviously a 2-piston caliper, but with the brake pad there, I can go back and forth slowly and just compress both pistons. We actually sell these tools at 1aauto.com. So we're just going to compress this slowly. As we're compressing this, fluid's coming out of the caliper, going through the hose, through the pipes, up to the master cylinder, and into the reservoir. And it's a good idea to check the fluid level after you're done to make sure that it's at the proper level and adjust when needed. So we'll just go back and forth, just compress it a little bit. Now that's fully compressed, pull that brake pad away. Just make sure these dust boots didn't get folded or anything. If you go slow enough, generally they go down properly and they look good. Now we'll take the caliper. Another thing you want to make sure, you never want to let the caliper hang from the hose because it could damage the hose. And we'll slide the caliper over the bracket and the brake pads. Get that into position. Install this caliper bolt. And then the top caliper bolt. I'll take a 17mm socket and a ratchet. And I'll snug these down. Then I can torque these with a torque wrench to 53 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to install these pad springs. It's recommended that you replace these when you do this job. You can put these on before you put the caliper on, but sometimes they spread the pads out and you got to hold the pads, so I decided to do it after. Which might be a little bit tricky to do it after. So whatever you guys want to do, if you want to do it before or do it after. Push that there, push that there. There's some little holes in the caliper pad themselves. This basically just pushes the pads out when the caliper is released. And I'll do the same for the top one. Reinstall the tire. Put the lug nuts on. And lower the vehicle. Now we're going to torque these lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds. We're going to use a torque wrench and we're going to torque them in a star pattern. The reason you do it in a star pattern is so that the wheel gets tightened down properly against the rotor and evenly. Can go around again just to double check. Make sure you got them all. You're good to go.
Thanks for watching. Visit us at oneauto.com for quality auto parts, fast and free shipping, and the best customer service in the industry.